Hello, my name is Brett Taylor, and I'm going to be talking about the Agile method and using Scrum. There's no clear-cut way of telling whether predictive project management or Scrum methods will work better. It just depends on the situation. The Agile approach is best for projects where their team can't clearly express the scope early in the project lifecycle. It allows the team to provide a potentially releasable product earlier in the process. An Agile project team will use several iterations of software rather than waiting until the end of the project to provide just one product. Scrum is the most popular of the Agile techniques. When using Scrum, a team utilizes specific roles, artifacts, and ceremonies. The three roles of Scrum are the product owner, Scrum Master, and Scrum Team. The product owner is responsible for deciding what work to do and what order to do it in. The Scrum Master ensures that the team is productive. Finally, the Scrum team works to produce the product. The three artifacts of Scrum are the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the burn down chart. The product backlog is a list of features organized by importance. The sprint backlog is a list of the highest priority items to be completed in a sprint. The burn down chart shows the remaining work in a sprint, organized on a day-by-day basis. Lastly, the four ceremonies facilitated in the Scrum method are the sprint planning session, daily Scrum, sprint reviews, and sprint retrospectives.
Hello, I'm Tara Downey with the Purple Group. Today I will be talking about the training necessary for the ACME company to transition from rigid project management like waterfall, as seen on this side, to a more flexible project management like Agile, or today we're specifically talking about Scrum. A few easy things to do to start the transition from rigid to flexible project management is to hold short daily meetings, which in the Scrum process is referred to as the daily Scrum. This would get everyone talking about the transition and help resolve any questions they may have. This would also help ease into the idea of changing from one project management style to the other. One of the main reasons why projects are not successful is an aversion to change. A daily meeting would help get everyone on board with the transition. From there, the training process can continue by conducting a skills assessment of all the team members. Understanding who has what skills to help the group is very important for team management. For example, in our group, Tim has video editing experience and software, which is why we've asked Tim to help us put this lovely video together. The next step in training the ACME company is to hold individual trainings about Scrum. Trainings would be held for executives, stakeholders, management, and the development team. The purpose of this would be to help promote all people in their understanding of Scrum methodology, which is basically a more flexible process with evolution and more changes than the previous design. Also, it would talk about Scrum artifacts, which include the product backlog, sprint backlog, and burn down chart, as described earlier by my colleague Brett. And Scrum ceremonies, which also mentioned by Brett, include the sprint planning session, the daily Scrum, sprint reviews, and sprint retrospectives. Once everyone has a grasp of what Scrum is, then it's time to put it all together with group trainings. And once the group trainings are complete, the team is ready to become a project management team utilizing Scrum. The training would be a project in itself and would follow the project management process groups of initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling, and finally closing.
Hello, I'm Tim Metler. We're going to continue talking about changing from traditional predictive software development methodologies to agile software development methodologies. And this focus of this segment is going to be on thinking about documentation when it comes to software development in an agile methodology. This key point summarizes that moving from traditional predictive software development methods to agile development requires changing the way we think about documentation. Here are some of the ways we have to change our thinking. Primary goal should be to develop working software when you're doing agile software development, not doing detailed, in-depth documentation. That is secondary. No, there is no solid relationship between project success and writing comprehensive documentation. The more documentation you write, the greater your chance of project failure, actually. The fundamental issue is communication, not documentation. Some thoughts about documentation. We should be documenting stable things, not speculative things. Documentation should be concise, roadmaps and overviews rather than details. We should just barely be good enough in our documentation. We should evolve with feedback for our documentation and document as you discover, not predict what the document should contain for information ahead of time. And this is a really critical point. I think it's a very good one. We must understand the total cost of ownership of a document, and one of the stakeholders, must choose to make that investment. There still is some documentation that is necessary in agile development. Electronic backups of physical paper artifacts, change decisions made by customers need to be documented. Business terminology still needs to be developed in a project dictionary. Traditional functional specifications when you're collaborating with a non-agile team, because they will still require those documents. And positive customer feedback should be documented to demonstrate the advantage of agile adoptions. I like this diagram. It's by Scott Ambler, who's a well-known agile project development consultant and author on the subject. He starts with a model, the model of whatever the software is going to do, that high-level model, and that model may describe the source code that will eventually result from that model, but the model also may become a document, some type of documentation. So that document is the documentation, and the documentation will describe the source code. Good source code, though, contains documentation in it, whether it's comments or the code itself is a form of documentation. So I liked how Ambler kind of connected the model, the software itself, and the documentation in this diagram. So I stole it from him. And here's a quote from Scott Ambler about agile software development documentation. Agile does not forbid documentation altogether, but agile practitioners must justify its need and use. Thank you.
Executive support is an important factor in the transition to Agile Scrum. When a team has been using other frameworks, they will try to stick to what is comfortable for them. For successful Agile Scrum adoption, the executive should try to push the team into the new methods and provide insight when things don't transition so smoothly. Esther Derby's article called The 3 Pillars of Executive Support for Agile Adoption provides some guidelines on how to better provide executive support. The first of the 3 pillars she mentions is called the power of no. The team members will often request exceptions so that they can use the old ways they are comfortable with. The executive should respond with a firm no to demonstrate their commitment to the new system. Exceptions should only be used for emergency situations. The second pillar is called the address systemic issues. After saying no, ask questions and find out what's behind the exception request. Seeing a pattern in these requests can lead to issues that only management can fix. The third pillar she describes is called the ability to hear unwelcome news. Just like being able to tell the team no, The executive must also be able to listen and hear the word no from the team. When setting an ambitious goal, the team and data say, no, we can't reach the goal, then the executive must re-examine their options. These 3 pillars made by Esther provide some good guidelines to follow for an executive as they support their transition to Agile Scrum.
Hello, my name is Rhoda Stolle. I'm going to be describing the management approaches for Scrum that you've chosen to use. So, Scrum is a framework for managing and controlling software development in rapidly changing and distributed environments. And self-management is a defining characteristic in Scrum. And so that's what's going to be used for this team. The team structure is pretty simple, consisting of the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the team members. These provide effective communication in the form of artifacts and roles, which are really the deliverables, and the roles being the ones mentioned above, the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the team members. Now, looking at the decision making within the team, you realize that Scrum brings decision-making authority to the level of the operational problems and uncertainties. A Scrum team is given significant authority and responsibility for many aspects of their work, such as planning, scheduling, assigning tasks to members, and making decisions. The team is accorded full authority to do whatever it decides is necessary to achieve the goal. So you realize as you transition from your traditional method to this Scrum method that transitioning from individual work to self-management teams requires orientation, not only by the developers but also by management, as you have learned in the slides before. Now let's look at an example of how to successfully apply a change in requirements within the Scrum framework. And so with your product backlog and your sprint backlog that feed into the sprints, there is constant communication between the Scrum Master and the product owner, who also corresponds with the stakeholders to verify that the deliverables are what they are expecting. And then so changes are effected immediately as this is fed back into the sprints, resulting in working increments, which are really the deliverables. So thanks for your attention.